Joseph and his brothers were in Egypt. Everyone was all right, and they had enough food, which was great. But which of God's promises had come true? Had Abraham's family become a great nation? Nope. Abraham and Sarah had a son, and all of his kids and their kids numbered about 70 people. That's a big family, but it's not a whole nation. Did they have their own land? No. They were living in Egypt, everyone else's land. Had they blessed the whole world? They didn't even know what that promise meant. How does one family bless the whole world? Of the 3 big promises given to Abraham, at that point, a total of 0 had come true. Well, Jacob's sons had kids, and their kids had kids, and their kids had kids. A lot of kids. There were hundreds of kids, and then thousands of kids. Then the Pharaoh, who was Joseph's friend, died, and there was a new Pharaoh, and then a new Pharaoh after that. And pretty soon Egypt was being ruled by a Pharaoh who didn't know anything about Joseph. He just knew that there were thousands and thousands of these people running around, these children of Israel. Remember how God changed Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah? Well, God also changed Jacob's name to Israel. So, all of Jacob's children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren became the children of Israel. They were also called Israelites. Now the new Pharaoh said, "Hey, there are too many Israelites around here," and he decided to do something about it. First, he made the Israelites slaves to the Egyptians. A slave is a person who is owned by another person. A slave had to do whatever his or her owner said. Being slaves meant the children of Israel had to do whatever Pharaoh said. They had to build stuff, and farm stuff, and clean stuff. Being slaves also meant they couldn't leave Egypt, ever. Which was a big problem, if you remember God's second promise, that his people would have their own land. How can you have your own land if you can't ever leave someone else's? But it got worse. The children of Israel kept having more kids, more and more kids. Eventually, there were so many babies that Pharaoh decided to do something really bad. Get rid of all the Israelites. Every Israelite baby boy, he said, should be thrown into the river. Then God gave one Israelite woman an idea. When her baby boy was young, she made a basket that floated like a boat and put her baby inside. Then she hid the basket in the tall grass at the edge of the river and waited to see what God would do next. A group of Egyptian girls were washing at the river, and they noticed the basket. They opened it up and, what? There was a baby! One of the girls decided that she would take him home and raise him as her own son. Can you guess who that girl was? It was Pharaoh's daughter, the daughter of the king of Egypt. Pharaoh's daughter brought home an Israelite baby to live in the palace just like an Egyptian, and right next to Pharaoh. She gave the baby a name, Moses, and he was about to become a very big part of God's rescue plan. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace as if he were Egyptian, even though he knew he wasn't. He knew he was really a child of Israel, an Israelite. One day Moses saw an Egyptian man hitting an Israelite worker. This made Moses really mad because he was an Israelite too. He got so mad that he killed the Egyptian. Yep, he got a little too mad. Have you ever made a mistake because you were just so mad? Yeah, that's what happened to Moses. Moses knew he was in big trouble, so he ran off into the desert to hide. For 40 years. That's a long time to hide, but he was sure if he came back to Egypt, Pharaoh would find him and punish him. So he stayed in the desert. Moses hid in the desert for so long he eventually met a nice girl named Zipporah, got married, had kids, and became a shepherd. His new life was much better than getting punished by Pharaoh, so Moses figured he'd just stay in the desert and never go back to Egypt, ever, no matter what. Until one day, when Moses was minding his own business and his sheep in the desert, he saw something weird. A bush was burning, but it didn't burn up. It just kept burning and burning. That's weird, he thought. And then the bush said something. Well, it wasn't really the bush talking, it was God talking through the bush that was burning. Since this was not a normal thing for Moses, or anyone for that matter, he decided he'd better listen. "Hey Moses," said God, "the children of Israel are having a terrible time in Egypt. I've heard them crying, and it is time to save them and bring them to the land I promised." "That's great," answered Moses. Then God said, "I want you to do it. You're going to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let the Israelites leave." And Moses said, "That's a terrible idea." Moses explained that he wasn't very popular in Egypt. After all, he had killed a guy. And God said, "I'll come with you." Moses went on to say that he really didn't like public speaking and that maybe someone else would be better for the job. Again, God said, "I'll come with you." Moses asked why Pharaoh would even listen to him if he just showed up and said, "Let my people go." And once again, God said, "I'll come with you." Then, as if the burning bush weren't impressive enough, God turned Moses' walking stick into a scary snake, and then back into a stick, because, well, he's God and he can do things like that. So after he stopped running from the scary stick snake, Moses asked, "Would you do cool stuff like that in front of Pharaoh?" God replied, "And stuff even more amazing than that." Moses thought and thought and thought, and finally said, "Okay, I'll go back to Egypt, and you'll come with me, right?" And then God probably said, "What part of 'I'll come with you' don't you understand?" So very nervously, Moses and his family started walking back to Egypt, and God went with him. "Let my people go." That's what Moses said as he stood in front of Pharaoh. He was probably very nervous. He didn't want to be in Egypt. He wanted to be back home in the desert, with his sheep and his wife and his kids. But there he was, standing in front of Pharaoh, saying exactly what God had told him to say. "Let my people go." And do you know what Pharaoh said? He said no. Rats. Okay, it was time for that neat trick with the scary stick snake. So Moses threw down his walking stick and boom! God turned it into a snake and back into a stick. "Let my people go," he said. And Pharaoh said no. Double rats. Then God told Moses it was time to do something even more powerful than the stick snake. So he began to send plagues, one at a time, to show Pharaoh just how powerful he was. A plague is a really bad thing, like bugs or a bad rash or a really big storm. Stuff you don't want to happen in your town. God told Moses to dip his walking stick in the big river in Egypt called the Nile. When his stick touched the river, all the water turned into blood. "Let my people go," Moses said again, and Pharaoh said no. Then God said to Moses, "Hold up your stick, we're going to make frogs." And boom! Frogs. Millions of them, everywhere. The fields were covered with frogs. The roads were covered with frogs. There were frogs in people's houses, even in their beds. "Let my people go," Moses said, trying not to step on a frog. And Pharaoh said no. Next, God sent gnats, tiny little bugs that got everywhere. Then flies, zillions of flies. And then a sickness that killed all the farm animals. Next, all the Egyptians got sores on their skin, itchy, ouchy sores all over. There was hail, big balls of ice that fell from the sky and knocked down all the corn and wheat and rice plants. And then locusts, big bugs that looked like grasshoppers and ate all the crops that weren't killed by the hail. Each time Pharaoh said no. These plagues, the frogs and flies and locusts and hail, weren't enough, so God turned out the lights. Egypt actually went dark. It was middle of the night, dark in the middle of the day. Egyptians couldn't see anything. "Let my people go," Moses said to Pharaoh. At least he thought he was talking to Pharaoh. It was so dark he was hard to tell. But a voice from the darkness said no. Finally, God knew exactly what he would have to do to change Pharaoh's mind. God told Moses it was time for the Egyptians to know how powerful he was. I am going to send an angel who will kill all the oldest sons of the Egyptians, he said, and then Pharaoh will let my people go. Moses thought hard about this terrible thing. How will the angel know which sons are the children of Israel? Moses asked. God gave Moses a sign. Each Israelite family was to prepare a lamb for a special meal, and then take some of the blood of that lamb and put it over the door of their houses. When the angel saw the blood of the lamb over the door, the angel would pass over that house. Moses and the Israelites were unsure, but they followed God's direction. They put the blood of the lamb over their doors. They ate the special meal which is now called Passover. They did everything just the way God had said, and then they went to bed. But they didn't get much sleep. That night an angel passed through all the streets of Egypt, and in the morning all of the oldest sons of the Egyptians were dead. The Egyptian moms and dads cried and cried. Even Pharaoh cried because his son died too. It was terrible. When he was done crying, Pharaoh called for Moses. Can you guess what he said? He said, "Go." God showed the Egyptians just how powerful he was. He showed the children of Israel that he heard their cries and that he would keep the promises he had made to their father Abraham. But that's not all. God also gave a hint about his third promise, the blessing for the whole world. Someday all of God's children would be saved from death. All it would take would be the blood of a very, very special lamb.